All right, so we've been looking at inequalities. We've been talking about how to write them down using inequality symbols, and we've been talking about how to graph them. But there's one other way to talk about inequalities, and that is interval notation. So interval notation is just a way of describing a spread of numbers. A spread of numbers is an interval, just a set of numbers going from one number out to another number, or maybe not ending at all. Maybe it just goes out to infinity. That's an interval. Okay, and these are the kinds of things we've been describing using inequalities. And so interval notation is another way of looking at this. So these are examples of interval notation. These letters here, A and B, think of those as numbers. Those are placeholders for numbers. And so these are possible different ways an interval can look. And what these symbols mean next to the A and the B, these are telling us whether A or B is included or not in the interval. Okay, so in this first one, we have a round bracket. The round bracket means that the number is not included. So you read that as does not include. Another way to say this is that it's exclusive. Because it excludes the number A. So this first interval, we would say, is the interval from A to B exclusive. Okay? This next interval over here, we see square brackets. The square brackets means does include. This does include the endpoints. And so we would say inclusive. So this, you could say, is the interval from A to B inclusive. Now, the next two intervals over here are mixes, right? You'll note that the first one here includes A, but excludes B. It's got a square bracket near A, but a round bracket near B. And the one after that excludes A, but includes B. So there's four possibilities for intervals. Okay, so let's take a look at an example here. Let's look at the interval that goes from -3 up to +4, and let's say it includes 4 and excludes 3. So I'm going to draw it like this. Okay, so here we've graphed it. How would we write that as an interval? Well, it begins at -3 and it goes up to 4. It does not include -3, so I use a round bracket, but it does include 4, so I use a square bracket. And that's how we would write that. How would we write that using inequalities? Well, remember, this would be a compound inequality. It's a compound inequality because it doesn't just go off to infinity. So how would I write that? Well, I'm looking at the set of numbers that are greater than -3, or in other words, -3 is less than those numbers. Same statement. But they are also, and they are less than or equal to 4. So here we see 3 different ways of writing down the same inequality, right? We have number 1 is the interval notation. Number 2 is a graph, and number 3 is inequality symbols. 3 different ways of conveying exactly the same thing. Let's look at another one. Let's look at the inequality that goes from -1 and includes -1 and goes out to, it just keeps going off to the right, never ends. How would I write this using interval notation? Well, it starts at -1 and it includes -1, so I use a square bracket. But where does it end? It never ends. So what do we write here? We write the infinity symbol. Now, what bracket do I put next to infinity? Well, if you think about it, infinity is not actually a number. right? It's just a symbol. It's a concept. It means that we just keep going. So it's just notation to tell the viewer that there is no end. But if it's not a number, can I include it in the interval? No, it doesn't make any sense to include something that's not a number into the interval. You can't include it. So we need to have a round bracket here. In fact, you will never have a square bracket near infinity. So never put a square bracket either this way or that way next to infinity. Okay? Very important. Never do that. Never put a square bracket next to infinity because infinity is not a number. It doesn't make sense to include it in the interval. Now, what would this inequality look like as a inequality using inequality symbols? Well, we see we're shading to the right of -1. And so I would write x is greater than or equal to -1. The or equal to part because I've included -1. So again, we have 3 different ways of writing this down. Okay, let's look at another example. And let me shade it in as follows. I'm going to go from, let's say, 2, and I'm going to shade off to the left. There we go. What interval notation would we use here? Well, on the right we have 2. It does not include 2, so I'm going to use a round bracket. Now, what goes on the left? Well, if it stopped at a number, I would include that number. But it doesn't stop at a number. It just keeps going. So what's the negative version of infinity? Negative infinity. That just means it keeps going without stopping off to the left. And I cannot put a square bracket next to infinity, so I have to put a round bracket there. And so that is the inequality. That is the interval notation we would use here. What would the inequality look like using inequality symbols? Well, x is to the left of 2, so I would write x is less than 2, and that's how I would write it as an inequality. So we have 3 different ways of viewing that one. Okay, now there's one more type that we might see. Let me make another number line. And if you remember in the one of the previous videos, we talked about inequalities that looked like this. Let's go like this and this. And let's shade in this one. And let's also shade in this one. Let's just for fun. Let's see what that is. And we will go out this way and out this way. This would be a compound inequality, and we talked about how to write this down using inequality symbols. How would we write this down using interval notation? Okay, well, for this, we're going to need another symbol. Okay, the symbol that we're going to use is going to be this symbol. It looks like a U, but it's more curvy than a U. It's it doesn't have that little tail at the end on the right hand side, right? It's like a horseshoe, right? Or like a little bowl. So this is the union symbol. Okay, so this is the union. Union means to unite, to just join together 2 sets. And that's what we need to do here, because if you look below, what we really have 2 different intervals that we need to say, unite them, put them together. I'm not looking at just one or just the other one. I'm putting them together and thinking of them as one. And so we want to unite them. So we're going to union them together. So let's look at the interval on the left. How would I write that down in interval notation? Well, it goes up to -4. And it includes -4, so I would use a square bracket. Now, what do I put on the left? Well, it just keeps going to the left. So I would write a -infinity. And I always put a round bracket next to -infinity. Now, what about that interval on the right? Well, that one starts at -1, so I'm going to include it with a square bracket, and it goes up to, well, it never stops. If there was a number where it stopped, I would write that number, but there is no number, so I write infinity, and let me fix something. I just noticed that negative sign should be inside the bracket there. I don't know why I did that. Funny things happen when you're recording videos. It's like the poltergeist of videos comes and haunts us. So okay, back to this interval. We should include, sorry, not include. Now I'm all flustered. Look at this. So now we should not include the infinity. Okay, because, well, we should never include infinity, right? Now, where does that union symbol go? It goes in between these because I want to view them together. Okay, how would we write this using interval notation? Well, x is less than -4. It's to the left of -4. Actually, less than or equal to -4. And then the part on the right, x is to the right of -1. So greater than -1, but it's also could be equal to -1 because we've shaded in the dot. And what do I write in between? We would write the word or. Okay. So the union symbol also means or. It's another way to think about it. And there are other symbols for uniting sets. There's a symbol for and, there's other weird symbols, but I'm just going to leave it at this. If you want to look those up, it's cool to find out what those are, but I'm not gonna go there in this video. Okay, so these are the different ways of writing down intervals. You'll notice we had several different ways, some using infinity, some not, and so a couple, the first one and the last one for compound inequalities. Okay, so that is it for this interval, and I will see you in the next one.